So I have something minor to talk about today, but something nonetheless that's very interesting to me as a lore enthusiast, and something I can talk about too that's not particularly spoilery as far as the main plot is concerned, and it's to do with the world map. So, you guys might have noticed, obviously, that we've got some new areas to explore in the expansion, and many of us are now thinking about Living World Season 4 and the additional places we could go from there. Season 3 was really all about taking us to extra areas on the established core world, but now that we've come so far south, there's suddenly all these other fringe locations based around the established maps at the start of Path of Fire we could be going to. So, for example, like being able to get in between this weird space that they left between Vabi and the Desolation. But I've noticed something quite curious on the world map beyond that, and that's the addition of some new region names. So like I said, fairly minor, but if you have a look here, we've got Dajkah is now listed down here, and perhaps much more fascinatingly, we've got Disalana up here. And in fact, as they've updated the world map to go a lot further south, to preserve this kind of aspect ratio of it still feeling reasonably wide, they've actually extended a hell of a lot off on the right. If you guys saw the data mining and what's actually on your client too, you'll notice this goes even further than we can currently see, and there are lakes revealed off on the side. So this has always been one of the more interesting things to me to think about. Where might we be going in the future? Now, a region name that's been added like this doesn't necessarily mean much for Guild Wars 2. We all know it. Back in 2012, they added several, like the Blood Legion homelands, like the Far Shiver Peaks, like Janthir Bay, the Isles of Janthir, the Woodland Cascades, and even down here as well. This was once upon a time called the Ancient Dwarflands, and now the Deljamore Front. Just because it's listed on the map doesn't mean we're going to be going there anytime soon. But they did add some down here, and hey, maybe there is a chance we'll be getting to explore these places. So I wanted to talk to you guys about what we know of these locations, and especially the Dzalana one up here, I think is really quite curious. So first let's start with Dajkah. Dajkah to me is the least interesting of the two. What is Dajkah beyond just perhaps this, chunk of the world as we see up here? Well, it is actually a Guild Wars 1 reference. It's a reference to an outpost from the first game. Outposts were like little town areas, essentially waypoints for the original product, and one of the few places that it genuinely felt like an MMO and you could meet random people. Most of the game took place in little instanced off cordoned areas. It was a place called the Dajkah Inlet, and the Dajkah Inlet itself in Guild Wars 1 was not this far north, really. It was actually quite far south. I'd predict it's somewhere, I mean, that Shaman's Historical Guide can probably show it, but it's probably somewhere, like, quite far down here. So to see now that there's an entire region called Dajkah is quite interesting, because before we had the Dajkah Inlet, and that could have just been it, right? It could have been that small region of the world, and that was it. So there was a bit of lore about the Dajkah Inlet. As you can see, I'm playing in it here on Guild Wars 1 right now. The specific region lore says this, that the settlement at Dajkah Inlet was destroyed long ago by a centaur raid, but that hasn't kept the corsairs and smugglers out. Now it's a busy base of operations for any number of dastardly deeds, and you'd best mind your manners in Dajkah before the townfolk there decide to educate you on corsair etiquette. So yeah, it was a Khornan outpost, and Khornan had this big thing going on with the centaurs that have now seemingly been eradicated by Guild Wars 2's time, as Jokos turned their bones into the Bone Palace, which was quite a sinister and exciting thing to have discovered in Path of Fire. So yeah, it was this Corsair place. Corsairs have been appearing in the current expansion in Guild Wars 2, 250 years later. We've known about Corsair activity around these areas a lot, so I guess what the devs are saying is what you once upon a time thought was just this little region is actually a huge Corsair-laden area off on the coasts. And so 250 years in the future, we've got this entire coastline, and what I'd expect if we could ever go here, and this is really just my speculation, but it would be full of pirates, and it would be full of beautiful sandy beaches and coves and so forth, which is a fun idea. Back in Istan in the original Nightfall as well, there was a beautiful area called the Isna Isles, and I've always wanted them to return to that beautiful kind of pristine paradise island beach aesthetic that had going on, and maybe Dajkah can do that. So Dajkah, by the way, was a little bit more than just an outpost, a waypoint, if you will, with some NPCs around that were Corsairs. It was actually also a challenge mission, so this is kind of Guild Wars 1's version of activities. They were optional missions you could do that you could compete with your allies to get a top score. And if you got the top score of the day, you'd get extra rewards monthly, quarterly. And so the Dajkah Inlet challenge mission took you to these islands. Now, the islands that it takes you to with these Corsair outposts on them never actually appear anywhere on the world map. They're kind of like theoretical places, presumably somewhere off the coasts, but that we'd never really get to see just by the way it was mechanically implemented. But what they technically were the guild halls that came. So when Guild Wars 1 campaigns released, they got new guild halls. And the guild halls you could claim as a PvE player to run around in, but also they were the sites of GVGs. And so 2 of the places you go to in this challenge mission are reused guild halls, and the Corsairs are just filled up with them. There's also a third place, a third island, which also looks like a guild hall, but isn't technically a guild hall. It's like a unique area, perhaps a guild hall that they were going to put in on Nightfall, but they never had enough time and decided to just use what they'd built as a component of this challenge mission. And so maybe we can suggest that actually these islands we visit and these guild halls that we visit as a part of the mission, they're actually to the north. And what we're seeing in Guild Wars 2 at this coastline, we can imagine like some theoretical islands existing off that these Corsair bases were on, and maybe that's something we'll be able to visit in GW2. That's really all there is to say about Dajkah. I was very curious to see that this had been added, because the Dajkah Inlet really, to me, felt like such a small, localized place, and I guess they've expanded on that idea. Again, whether we'll go to this place, I don't know. But yeah, so it's on there now. I have a feeling that they just thought, oh, this is a lot of dead space without a region name, let's dump something on there. And I'm happy that when they did that, they looked back to Guild Wars 1 and various areas of that region of the world and did something that'd be quite intelligent for it. So that's Dajkah. Now let's get to the much more interesting one, Disalana. Now, Disalana is interesting to me, first of all, because it's a lot more remote. But also because there's actually quite a lot of history with this, again to do with Nightfall. So this is not the first time we've ever heard of Disalana, all right? This actually appeared as a region name on an early development map for Nightfall before the product itself actually released. I believe it's a pre-release map, so you can see it here. It took me a bit of Googling. Thankfully, the Guild Wars 1 wiki, useful as ever, has got a good copy of this. I'm pretty sure it's a pre-release map. There was another Nightfall pre-release map, though, that I know showed the Vabian Arena, which isn't on this one you're looking at, so I'm not really sure how that all ties together. But this is kind of a rare old map that showed Dzalana. I actually went and got my physical Nightfall Collector's Edition and Regular Edition to look at the maps that came with those to see if they had Disalana on them, and it didn't. So I don't know where this is from. Maybe the manuals rather than the big printed maps. In any case, while this appeared on some early promotional material for Nightfall, it never actually appeared in-game. Ever. So if you look here in Guild Wars 1, if I'm in Nightfall right now and I press M and I look at my world map, there is no Disalana marked there anymore. It was only on like these external maps. So it strikes me as very similar perhaps to that third Dajkah Inlet Island guild hall we were talking about. It strikes me that maybe this was a theoretical place they were going to have a couple of maps in, or it was going to be a bit of Nightfall content, but then they realized they'd bitten off too much, more than they could chew, and it kind of got culled away. And we know that happened quite a lot with Nightfall, actually, even with some interior 3D exploration. Someone was doing a Guild Wars 1 compatible tool where you could explore some interesting places. But so that's really what we knew of Disalana. Now, there was also the Guild Wars 1 data mining scene and the Guild Wars 1.dat. Now, I've already talked about this in a recent video. There were several random strings of text that were lore heavy, that referred to things that we could see, and we've never really known if they were canon. Now, there is a string of text from the Guild Wars 1.dat that seems to be suggesting at Disalana, and it specifically says this. It says, extensive canyon lands to the east of Dzagan, which are infested with human tribes and other dangers. So this has been some real fringe lore. This is why I'm so excited about this, because this has been some really, like, out there weird stuff that the devs easily could have abandoned and just ignored. But here we are in 2017. Boom, they put Disalana there. They substantiated this stuff. Much like what I talked about in that previous video, this is another little thing that suggests some of that Guild Wars 1 data mined text strings, they might actually be being made canon now. The closest place we could get is a place called the Wilderness of Bazda. And so this was a very remote, optional region of the world that you could visit as a part of your adventure through the Nightfall campaign. And it was mostly just filled, it was on the fringes of Vabi, filled with Harpies, Hecate. There were Minotaurs for a little while that then are sort of deleted from the map after you complete the quests. There were a couple of quests to do right here on the edge of Disalana, but they weren't very interesting. There wasn't much lore. They were basically just simple filler quests about culling away the Harpies and the Hecates, and that's it. Just on the edge of that, of the wilderness of Bazda, there is the citadel of Dzalana. And now we're getting something a little bit more interesting. So, Disalana has a citadel of Dzalana, that DZ reappears there. I don't know whether that's supposed to be intentional. But this massive citadel is held by Prince Amta the Mighty. Prince Amta the Mighty being the only one of the 3 merchant princes back then to actually try and fight against Nightfall once Varishos's motives have become clear. The other princes flee into the hidden city of Adashim. And so we've got this big citadel that you can choose to defend as a part of the story. But even in that citadel that sounds a bit like this region name, Disalana, there's not anything that really talks about Disalana itself. Prince Amta himself was said to have been raised in a desert region. And that sounds kind of remote, so maybe this is where he was raised. I don't know. That would be a bit of a stretch, though. Now, the ruined citadel itself doesn't quite appear in Guild Wars 2. It's just off the map, so maybe we can get some more interesting lore and clarification about why this DZ appears quite frequently. There is a curiosity, though, in the top near this jumping puzzle area you do on the skimmer. That's actually called the Dajkah Uplands, so the DZ appears again there. And I wonder what the devs are playing at. The funny thing with this, though, is we're talking like Brand Central right now. And so you don't really get much world building or lore or NPCs and things to talk about here because everything's just kind of been destroyed. But yeah, certainly a candidate for a new map or a new place to go might be coming off of the Dajkah Uplands as we start to move north and we get to revisit the Bastion and the Wilderness of Bazda and so forth in the sequel, which we can't just yet. And I mean, it's a giant fortress, right? I'm sure we all want to go to such a cool place once it's become a twisted, corrupted castle of hell because of Kralkatoric's minions. So yeah, there is kind of some other suggestions here to go into. Because we know that lots of Harpies potentially were around this region, we could say maybe this is the homeland of the Harpies. The Harpies have always had some interesting lore that was pushed a bit more, I feel, in Path of Fire. There is lore that says that the Harpies potentially could have once been a much more majestic, beautiful race that is now fallen. And this comes from the Nightfall manuscripts, which, remember, they produced as they were concepting Ilona itself and potentially Disalana too. So the manuscripts themselves say this: in Vabi, fierce and filthy Harpies prey upon wandering bands of travelers for anything that they can steal. Some legends hold that the Harpies were once beautiful winged creatures who proudly served Dwayna, the goddess of air, until a catastrophic event cast them down from the heavens. And now they stalk the earth as they struggle to survive. And we also know that Dwayna is, you know, as an entity, not just as a god, but as a race. Dwayna is like this blue thing with these beautiful wings. And there have been these interesting theories that maybe that Dwayna wasn't just served by that precursor Harpy race when they were great, but Dwayna is a Harpy. She is that race. And so a second ago I said I think that this has been pushed a bit more by Path of Fire. Well, that's quite interesting then, because in Path of Fire, who noticed that some of the Harpies are blue? The easiest one I know to go and find is the one in Joko's harem. So maybe if they are going to go on this angle at some point, and then Disalana is supposed to be some bastion, some stronghold of the Harpies and Harpy culture and so on, and maybe they could tie all of that together. One of the other interesting things about being near Disalana in the wilderness of Bazda is you do get some NPCs to talk to. So one of the ones that appears is a guy called Master Engineer Jakumba. Now, we're really going to start reaching here. We're going full tinfoil hat right now. And he's got some interesting dialogue where he talks basically it seems like he's talking about maybe making a television, right? Here's his dialogue. He says this: I've got this fascinating contraption I'm working on. Imagine containing the power of fire magic into a box and tweaking it to make different colors. Wouldn't that provide hours upon hours of entertainment? Which is obviously just a fun little reference that the writers did a lot in Nightfall. There are other NPCs that talk about other similar stuff. There's a guy that's saying at night he likes to think about what it would be to basically be an airplane pilot. And then there's some quite blatant references to just ArenaNet as a company. Some of them talk about like a hat one of the devs once had, and just some other vague stuff like that. I think there's even a vague reference to computers. Now, we could go really crazy down the rabbit hole and point out that when they made Nightfall, the idea of Eye of the North in Guild Wars 2 wasn't established yet, and they could have been hinting at Utopia, which was still upcoming, and Utopia was going to have big time travel themes. So were these going to be references to going forward in the future as a part of Utopia, and we would see planes and stuff? Obviously, that's all a bit insane, but a fun thing to maybe look at. And maybe Dzalana and the Harpies and their ancient civilization all was going to have some kind of ties in there. The thing I really love about Master Engineer Jakumba, though, has something else to do with Dwayna, and that is that later in the story, what he's going to do is he's going to take a crystal from Glint's lair, he's going to infuse it with Dwayna's magic to allow it to shine very brightly, and he's going to give that to the Order of Whispers. The Order of Whispers will then take it into the Realm of Torment and use it as a light in the darkness in one of the coolest areas of Endgame, Ravenheart Gloom, which was like this pitch black place that you were supposed to carry this crystal around to light up the way. And that came from Master Engineer Jakumba, who had infused it with Dwayna's magic. So if you tie it all together, and you think that the Harpies are Dwayna's race and so on, maybe that explains how Jakumba's got some proficiency with Dwayne and magic. I don't know, though. I think it's all gone a little bit far. That's Disalana. That's as much as I can give you guys, digging through all of the wikis and my knowledge of the franchise and things. Again, we may never go there, but those are kind of the weird fringe things, and this is some really odd lore, right? So all of these theories and everything I've been talking about have been true and have been speculatable for a long time. And then immediately when Path of Fire comes out, the map expands, and look, the devs write Disalana up there. And that I find really quite fun. Dajkah 2, to an extent, but this one definitely. It was nice to see that they went for this and they didn't just name it something else. It would have been cool to see like something else up here with a really weird name we'd never heard of before, ever. So they really pushed the boundaries. But honoring such a weird area of Guild Wars 1 discussion, I think's been pretty fascinating. And so, well, there you go, guys. That's just something I wanted to talk about. Something that struck me as interesting when the expansion came out. And I'll be sure to give you more random little weird lore discussions like this as we go forward, as long as people are actually finding them interesting. So thanks, guys. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you very shortly.